And we are live, guys. It's Matt Haycox here for what I'm sure is going to be a very exciting episode of the No Bollocks Podcast. Because tonight I am joined all the way from England by Marc Adams. He's entrepreneur and author, and when he has a book titled "The Secrets to 10xing Your Business and Cashing Out Tax-Free, how can we do anything but hang on intently to listen?" Listen, Marc and I were talking a little bit before we recorded. And this is going to be, I think, quite an interesting tactical episode because normally, when I talk to my audience, you guys are entrepreneurs, want to be entrepreneurs, and you struggle with the main battle of how do I start a business and then how do I grow a business. And if you manage to beat all of the horrendous statistics of failure for starting a business and the horrendous statistics of failure for keeping a business, you then maybe one day want to come and sell it. And I think what most business owners will find is that the statistics for them to be able to sell their business are almost as horrendous as the statistics for them to be able to start and grow a business. And that's quite specifically what we're going to talk about with Marc. I think one of the without doing too much of a spoiler alert, one of the numbers quoted before we came online is that 9 out of 10 businesses that are up for sale won't sell. Quite worrying, given that most of the people who want to sell these businesses are probably at retirement age, are probably needing to cash out that capital to live into their twilight years, provide for the kids, whatever it may be. So if you've got a business and you're thinking about selling, or you're going to start a business and want to sell, this is the episode for you. So welcome to the show, Marc, and looking forward to hearing more what you've got to say, buddy.
Matt, privileged to be here. Thank you so much for having me on the show, and what a great intro. Really appreciate that.
Well, look, let's set the scene. I guess before you were author and advisor guru, you had your own business. I presume that you grew and sold. Tell me about that journey and anything that went wrong along the way, and why you now know what you know.
Well, I still have it, so I've not sold it. I've been into the outsourcing space, so taking resources from high-cost locations like the UK and the USA and putting them into low-cost locations of equal skill for quite a long time. And so that's a business that does very well for us, continues to grow. And as investors, we're always looking for other businesses to add on to that. No plans to sell that in any way, shape or form. But along the way, in the private equity world, to the point that you made, you tend to find that 9 out of 10 companies or 8 out of 10 companies that you might be interested in acquiring in the outsourcing world or any other industry in the SME space. So let's call that 50 million or less just for this conversation. We could argue whether that's 30 or 70, but depending on who you're talking to, they'll give you a different number. But they tend to stick on the market. And they stick on the market because most people say, well, if you're dealing with a broker or an agent, they'll overvalue it to get the listing, like you do an estate agent, but it's not always like that. Sometimes, in fact, quite often, if it's a retirement sale, you're going to find that somebody who spent their life building a business and a reputation and looking after the people and the culture in the market that they're serving gets to a point where they're brilliant at doing the thing and they come to sell the business, and to the point that you made, they find it's difficult to sell because they talk to their accountants or their lawyers beforehand, and the conversation may go something along the lines of, well, what do you need to retire? Well, if you need, I'll make these numbers up, if you need 5 million, then okay, well, you're probably going to need to sell for 10, because after you've paid your taxes and fees and everything else that goes along with it, you could lose, or you will drop out of the sale price between 30 and maybe as much as 45% of the sale value, depending on where you are in the world and where the company's registered and so on and so forth. There are some places where that's not applicable, which is great. But the States, the UK, the budget recently has increased the situation there to be less favorable than it was. In the US, in some places, it would certainly be up around 44% by the time you're done. And that means that an owner can't really sell the business if they don't get that lofty sticker price, because they've still got bills to pay. And then you find that they're in their 70s working in a business when they'd rather be doing something else. And frankly, they should be doing something else. So what private equity does, which is where I was, if you go back to the 2020, around the pandemic time, we were looking at 91 companies in a pipeline map that we would like to have done something with, that were good businesses in the UK and in the US, but we felt that they were all, well, we felt, and our backers, our investors felt, that they were overpriced. And so what you would tend to do is you wait, just like you would with a property. If you go on the market with a property and it's too cheap, it's gone in a couple of hours. If it's too expensive, it's there a year later. And if you want to sell it, you're going to drop the price, or you're going to improve the property so that it becomes worth the money that you're looking for. But nobody really thinks about that from the buying the business perspective until they've got it. So private equity will try and buy cheap, improve the value of the business over time with some more additions or bolt-ons to that business that makes sense. 5, 6, 7 years later, it will sell it, hopefully, if they've got it right, at a significant profit. But what about the people that you bought the business from? You bought low from them. And so, it's business. So you could argue that they're not going to get the return that maybe they deserve for in many cases, their life's work. So if I just park that for a minute, I didn't all of a sudden, overnight become this knight in white shining armor wanting to rescue business owners and improve the value of their business. What happened for me was, if you remember back to 2020, we were all in that grip of the pandemic, and through 2020, no vaccines, and all we saw in lockdown around the world, if I take you back in your mind's eye to when that was going on, was league tables of how many people had died in what country and how many new infections there'd been. And we got around, and everybody was in lockdown at home, whole families, and all of us are watching the news. And in my case, my family of 5, my youngest is 10. And so he's looking at that, and God knows what runs through the mind of young kids like that. But we got to that November period and we were allowed out in the UK in little groups of 4, 5 or 6. And so one of the things that I did in that period of time was, unfortunately for me, I got a visit with my consultant and a diagnosis of stage 4 cancer, and given 6 months to live. Now, I'm not telling you this because I'm looking for a sympathy story. It was kind of pivotal as to what happened next. But faced with that, your mind gets really, really focused. And all the hospitals everywhere, all over the world, but in the UK were shut because they were just strewn with people suffering from COVID. No opportunity at all to deal with people like me that had stage 4 cancer. Except there was one hospital in central London that could deal with it. And luckily for me, I was able to afford private medical insurance, and they couldn't get me in anywhere. So the first miracle for me was they turned around and said, it's going to cost so much more, but we can do nothing else. You get it sorted, we will cover it all. And unbelievable. If anybody wants to know who they are, hit me up afterwards, I'll tell you. But that was an amazing stroke of luck for me. So January, I went in to have the cancer taken out. But while I was there, I picked up the original strain of COVID, which wasn't very pleasant. And no vaccines, remember? And so you're going from a 6-month window to, at that point, because the vaccines weren't in, and we were all going through this original strain, not knowing a lot about it, but we'd kind of started to pick up that it was a 12, 15-day cycle before you would see, probably on day 5 or 6 or 7, things getting better or things getting worse. So in that period of time, I've gone from 6 months to 12 days, and I'm trying to get 3 decades of entrepreneurship into a 10-year-old's head. And one of the things I was explaining to him, Matt, was 9 out of 10 companies, when they come to market, sometimes get a bit sticky and they don't sell. He said, what happens to the one? I said, well, they get sold. He said, who buys it? I said, there's any number of people that would buy it. He said, what happens to the 9? And I said, well, they stick on the market for a long time. He said, why? Why don't they sell? I said, well, they tend to be worth the money probably, but not, the market doesn't look at it and agree that it's worth the money for the reasons that we were talking about earlier in the show. And he immediately sort of said, well, he said, what are you doing to help them be worth the money that they need? And I said, well, we're not, we're waiting. And he said, why are you waiting? I said, because they're too expensive to buy with the backers that we have. They're going to look at it and see what's the market value for the business, and you end up waiting. He said, you should be helping those companies improve their position so that they can sell for the price that they need. And I said, well, why would I be doing that? And quick as a flash, he said to me, and I'll never forget it, what happens if the parents of those companies, the people that own those companies, get COVID and they die? Who's going to look after their families if they can't sell their companies? Which was a kind of it was a pivotal moment that kind of hit me around the head as to, well, what would happen? But I didn't have an answer. And at the time, to be fair, I was going through the 12-day window, not knowing what was going to be my own destiny and my own path. Anyway, once you're clear of that, 8 weeks later, I'm in with my consultants to get a checkup on how things had gone for me. And I'd beaten the COVID, luckily for me. And when I sat down with them, they said to me, "We got good news for you. We got bad news for you." And I went, "Well, let's have the good news." And they said, "We can't find any of the cancer." To which I thought, that's brilliant. If that's the good news, well, I wonder what the bad news is. So I said, "Well, what's the bad news?" And they said, "We've got no idea why." I said, "That's bad news." And they went, "Well, not exactly, but yeah, we've got no idea." And I said, "Well, you must have some kind of guess." And they went, "Not really." I said, "Well, what is it that you think it could be?" And at which point they said, around April 2021, you started to see in the medical journals, so not the ones I would normally see or you would normally see, Matt, unless you're in the profession, but you started to see some medical journals come around with 12, 13, 14 cases that were getting reported of people that were a bit like me, that had late stage cancer, terminal diagnosis, and then got the original strain of COVID. And for some reason, they didn't have the cancer anymore. Nobody really knew why. My instant reaction was COVID the cure for cancer? The answer to that was no, but what they think it might have done is drive the immune system into overdrive, which turns out to be such a great thing for all of us in dealing with our ailments and things that go wrong with us if it's in basically decent shape. And in my case, I was lucky that it was, but it doesn't say I'll deal with a cold or a sore toe, or it just blitzes whatever it can. And they think it was that got rid of the residual cancers that were there, because with stage 4, you've metastasized, so it's in more than one place. And I've been lucky enough to be clear ever since, and I'm about to come off the list as, you know, no longer on the watch list. So I'm, or maybe I've got another 6 months, but I'm just, with the kind of cancer I had, it's a 1 in a million chance that it could come back. So I consider myself to be unbelievably lucky. But as I said, I'm not looking for a sympathy vote on this. What I wanted to what I'll share with it is it kind of changed my direction a bit, because once I'm clear and I'm getting to the point where I'm getting back in the chair and life's changing, because your values change from being a workaholic to balancing life up to work and family a little bit more than I had. My youngest was reminding me of the 9 out of 10 and had I done anything? And the problem for me was, how would you influence or help so many people? Because it's not an isolated problem. It's a business issue that you see all over the world, because business owners tend to be brilliant at the thing, but everything else around it maybe goes by the wayside. Maybe it's just something they don't know very much about, or possibly haven't had any exposure or experience of. Whatever the reason, it's a global problem, not a UK or US or Middle East problem. So I started thinking about, how would you write a book? And that's how would you influence these people? And so the answer for me was, if I could write a book that gave people some basic guidance on things that they could do to improve the profit of their business, they would definitely improve the value of it. Now, what do I mean by that? Generally speaking, you will probably, in general terms, if you've got a business which is doing less than $1 million in EBITDA, it's probably worth 1 times its EBITDA. Now, there are some variations. Some industries will be worth more, maybe 2 or 3, but they're not going to be worth 10. Very rarely. In established, more traditional businesses, I am not talking about AI startups in Silicon Valley. I'm not talking about that kind of stuff. Now, if you've got a business that's doing 1.5 to 2 million in EBITDA, you've got a very strong case to say that that business is worth 5, 6, maybe 7 times, in some industries more, it's EBITDA. So if you can get to 2, you've got a strong case to say that you're worth 10. But how do you go from, let's say, 750K in EBITDA to 2 million in EBITDA? Because the 750 to 10 million seems to be such a big gap, and it is, but there are some things that you can do to help you on that journey. And so what I wanted to do in the book was put some of these things down. And guess what? All I've done in the book is make available to people what private equity would be doing. If they acquired a company, they'd be looking to improve the sales and profitability of a business organically. They'd be looking to grow that from, say, 750 to 900 or 1 million, and potentially then buy another business to bolt on the side of it. Therefore, if you've got another business you're bolting on the side of it, which is also 900 or a million in EBITDA, now you've got two, and you've covered your gap from 750K to 1.8 to 1.9 in EBITDA just by doing those two things. But there's other things that you can do. I come from an outsourcing or technology background, and if you can reduce some of your cost base without degrading the quality of what it is that you're reducing the cost base on, then for sure you're going to add to the bottom line directly, and that will provide you with some capabilities for maybe some top line growth. So as an example of that, one of our clients in North America, 30 positions at 100K each, loaded cost internal, outsourced to India in this case, on this occasion, brings that cost down to 25 grand per person. That's 2.25 million straight on the bottom line, which they chose not to take on the bottom line. They reinvested it in sales, which puts 20 to 22 million on the top line with the 4 salespeople that they hired. And that's at a 60% GP. I don't know the net figures on that, but it's still a significant change, right? So he's saving money to grow the business. And effectively, in that example, the cost of growing the business was for free because they saved the money first. So the combination of these things help you grow significantly the value. And I wanted to get that in the hands of people, which I did by way of the book. But that's not the whole story. Of course, when you come to sell a business, going back to what I was saying about the tax bill and the fees bill that you're going to get typically, then that could, depending on where you are, that could be 40% or more. So if you sold at 10, you'd lose 4 potentially or more in tax. What if there were a way in which you could help people, depending on where they are in their situation, reduce that down to potentially 0, which you can do in some places, but you can't in all places. But certainly you can mitigate that or minimize that down to very low levels. And then there's a third and final piece, which I do not talk about in the book. And that third and final piece is, if you've been lucky enough to follow this guideline and you get to that 10 million valuation and you sell it, then what are you going to do with the cash? So one of the greatest ways that you can roll over, not all the time, but much of that cash, is you might roll it into other very tax efficient, let's call them programs, maybe in property, which gives you a lot of mitigation and benefit from that perspective. Property is not the only one, but in America, that's a popular vehicle. In other places, it is as well. And so it was kind of, how do you put business owners who've worked all their bloody lives to create significant value that at the point of sale, they're going to have it stripped away from them? How do you change that and keep it in their bank account and put more money in their bank account and then try and protect that moving forward? So the essence of the book was to get that in the hands of as many people as I could. But I discovered that 80% of people that get a book don't read it. So I thought, bloody hell, why did I waste all that time? So that kind of led me into, by accident, I was invited onto the first podcast I'd ever done or ever been on. Nervous as hell. And now, I'm privileged to have been invited on a few more, including your show, just to share the message. Now, it turns out that it's not just the elder people or the retiring age group that find this message quite interesting. And I was really surprised by this. I started doing some social media video posting. I got to tell you, I'm terrible in social media. And if you look at any of my videos, which are mainly shorts, you'll think the lighting's terrible and all the rest of those things. However, the younger generation on TikTok in particular have come through, and what they're interested in was a surprise to me. They want to know what the end game is. It's like a Stephen Covey thing of start with the end in mind, because some of them getting into their 30s are beginning to think that they want to take some money off the table, maybe to pay down a mortgage, and maybe they've got a young family, just to take the pressure off a little bit. Some of them are thinking we want to build towards the end game, knowing where we should be going, and they're much earlier in their journey, which is a great way to get started, because they can start to think about the things that they might want to consider doing along the way to be the most advantageous and efficient for them, so that they end up with most of the proceeds of the sale of a business in their bank account and not everybody else's. So lots of surprises along the way. Wasn't something I deliberately set out to do, but so glad that I have done it, because I feel a lot better about helping other people along this journey than I certainly did from a private equity perspective of, trying to make as big a margin in the middle as you can. there you go. That was a very long-winded answer to your
I was
question.
going to say, I feel redundant. I think
I'm so sorry.
if I'd ask a question now, I'll have to go home. No, so let's all right. We've got a lot of scenes set, and we'll probably a few questions answered before asked. But let's just rewind a bit to the beginning of people's business starting life. And I think a lot of what gets talked about nowadays is building the business from day one with the sale in mind. And without going off on too wild of a tangent, something I have failed on in all of my businesses in the past, and something I'm kind of quite anal about now is processes, procedures, and almost like you're building a franchise style model around either current businesses or future businesses, to ultimately make me as redundant as possible, make those businesses as replicable as possible. And I mean, look, I know you've been talking about 1 to 2 million EBITDA here, so I don't know how low we can go, for some of the things in the book. But I would say a lot of the problem with most businesses that are up for sale is that I would argue that they're not even businesses. That they're just jobs. Just potentially well-paid jobs for people. Maybe not even that well-paid of a job for someone. It's just an idea. Someone runs a sweet shop. Someone has a round of cars to valet or whatever it may be. So I mean, how far back in the journey do you teach people to have that saleable business?
Yeah. So it's to do with the dynamic. So first and foremost, I believe that the book would help anybody with an overview and a structure of the direction, and if you like, a mini roadmap of things to consider on their journey. What it does not do is provide you a detailed plan of what's going to happen, because from that perspective, you could put a plan in place of where you want to be in a year's time, but how you think you're going to get there in this next 12 months and how you actually get there will often be very, very different, because a lot of things will happen that you may not have encountered. But the principles of what you might be looking for, I think, are broadly similar. Now, to your point, if you are an owner operator and the face of the business, it's difficult to sell the business anyway, because if you leave the business and you are the business, that's a big red flag to any investor that might want to buy you, unless they're buying the book of business and they want to bolt you on. So, for example, a sweet shop is not necessarily the greatest example of one that couldn't sell, because it's got a high street location and a footfall of customers, and there is a scenario there where that kind of business could sell. If you are an IFA and you've got a book of business doing mortgage loans over a long period of time and you want to retire, then a lot of those businesses don't sell. In fact, I was talking with somebody just yesterday who's specializing or wants to specializing in buying that book, even though they know that the owner is going to retire. Now, with the owner retiring, what they generally do in that scenario is just walk away from it. But what if you could find a way to keep that person's name or brand on the business in the background while you did a marketing arrangement to cross-sell and upsell to those customers that person's got, because they're cyclical and they repeat business with people, but they want the feeling of knowing and liking and trusting. So by using that brand and doing that, you could pay that person a commission on all future sales for as long as you felt that you needed to integrate that, in that case, that lead database into your business and grow it that way. Very cost effective. If you've got other kinds of businesses where you are, so if you go to a bigger business, a manufacturing company that we've recently been working with, they were the driving force and face of the business. And that was a real issue when they wanted to sell, because investors are not going. So the strategy for them is to retire from the day-to-day operations first, which means you need to grow big enough to have a second line management team in play that increasingly are running the business on a day-to-day basis. And that's when you retire from day-to-day operations. The next piece is you resign from the board in a business like that, so that you are still the majority owner and shareholder of the business, and ultimately you've got control, but you're not actively guiding and directing the board, because you've now got a trusted, up-to-speed management team in place that's doing all that for you. Now, the benefit to you of doing that is that it will instill a sense of reliability in the business and predictability in the business, because It's not dependent on you and or your partner, depending on how you've got it set up. I'm talking limited companies here predominantly, or LLCs, depending on where you are. And so that allows you to exit the business legitimately much more quickly. What you do see a lot of the time is owners will present that they are not in the business. They work a couple of days a week, but it's pretty clear that they're driving the business. And so that makes it difficult to sell. It's not impossible, but it's going to hit you on the valuation because of it, because there's more risk. So at the very least, it's going to structure a bigger element of the payment downstream until that risk has been mitigated. Whereas if you deal with it up front, you can still be involved in strategy. And often the owner will be asked to roll over a percentage of their ownership into the new co on the basis that the buyers are looking to take it on the next stage of its journey and put other businesses around it. And their strategic importance and value could be very useful in that. So, but if you want to stay as a one-man business or the face of the business in a really smaller turnover, it's going to be difficult to sell it in anything other than locally or some kind of relationship or family kind of thing. It's not easy to do. It's not impossible. It's not easy to do. And
so, tell me, I mean, with all the businesses that you've seen for sale and sell at various multiples, PEs, etc. Are there some sectors or potentially some business types that you would just say to people, listen, if you're thinking of starting a business, do not start a business in that sector, because your best chance is you're going to sell it for buttons?
No, it's more about the strategy of how you're going to do it. So this past weekend, something as innocent as getting a haircut. So happened, as all good hairstylists will. I say hairstylist, this is a barber shop. Who am I trying to kid? The question they asked me was, what do you do? So I said, well, I'm a bit of an investor and I like to help companies improve their value. They said, oh, we want to start a business. What do we do? So I said, well, if you want to, you can get your first business. And this case for them, it's a stylist shop. Make sure your footfall's right in terms of passing trade. Don't spend a lot of money rekitting it. So get one that's already in reasonable condition. It's $100,000 to fit one of those things if you've got to do it from scratch. So keep your costs down, but grow your profits in that business to the point where you're past the VAT threshold and you're up to 150, 160, 170 in EBITDA. At that point, keep it running and try and grow it to 200. Then you go looking to buy another one, because your fastest way to grow then is to add a second and a third and a fourth and a fifth and a sixth. So if you try to do that organically, it will take you 15 years to get halfway to where you want to be. But if you can get the first one up and running, and then you go and get another one using the same principle, get it to the same point, you get 6 of those, and you're now at 1.5 million in EBITDA collectively across the group. Now, you might not be 6 times on that, because that's going to be a trade sale, but you are at a shitload more money. Excuse my language. You are at a lot more money than you would have been organically growing a few salons, and it will take you a third of the time to get it done. So there's an example of, it doesn't matter what the industry type is, it matters what your strategy is going to be to get you from where you are now to where you think you want to be. So what we effectively had in 30 minutes was, I've given them a 5-year plan to where they should aim to be in 5 years. And they were already thinking it's a 10-year journey, but they've already bought into the 5-year plan. They don't know how they're going to do that, but they're on the journey to solve the problem. What I really loved about these guys is they're not trying to be perfect before they get started. They're off making 5 or 6 mistakes and revising the plan to be a better plan while everyone else is still thinking about it, and they haven't left the gates, if that makes sense. So you could do that principle with plumbers, electricians, hair salons, anything in the high street, anything that people use. Potentially you could apply that to, and that's at the lower EBITDA multiples and smaller company range. All of them have the potential to be something much more significant. Now, you do want to think about who that buyer might be. So in their case, I don't know who the buyer would be, but you'd certainly look, are big salons going to be acquiring? Is PE stepping in the marketplace to deal with that? And are they going to be interesting? Because then you start building towards a PE acquisition and taking into account what they're going to be looking at. Obviously, profitability is going to be one of those things, and then systemization and things like that will be another. But they're on the journey, not solving all the problems on day one, but with a solid direction and which way they want to go. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Now, I would imagine the answer to this question would be very dependent on what business sector it is. But how how likely is it that someone is going to get 90 to 100% of the purchase price paid on day one, and how often are they going to have to take a big carryback?
Yeah, so I'm going to go right out on a limb and say it ain't going to happen. Not happening.
As in, you are never getting 100% of value on day one.
It really depends on the price you're looking at, Matt. If you're undervaluing it, so if it's worth 10 and you're selling for 5, then yeah,
sure.
You still got some risk, and the buyers are going to take that into consideration. But with normalized rules, let's say no, you're going to get some money at closing, and then the rest will be on deferreds, and that's very much the usual way of getting it done. So what is the difference between a deferred and an earnout? Because it's really important. So if you're worth 10 and you're going to get a third of it down, so you're going to get 3 1/3, the remaining 6.6 is going to be deferred over a period of time that you agree, right? And there are ways in which you can get more than 10 depending on who your buyer is going to be and how you sell it, but that's maybe for another time. So just take those numbers. Your deferred will be over a period of time. What you're looking to do as the seller is have the confidence that the buyer is going to be able to deliver on that and maintain the business going forward and not strip it and close it and things like that. But with deferred, you're owed the money anyway, because they're valuing it today and they're deferring the payments. If you're doing an earnout, that's where it's worth 10, but you want 15, and somebody will say, I'll give you 15, but you've got to hit these numbers, which represent growth. And if you don't hit those numbers, you don't get the extra bits. So it's important to think about my deferred should be in my bank. It's just when's it coming? And my earnouts are within my control, providing I can hit these numbers, we will get paid those additional sums of money. A lot of the time, you do get into a situation where those earnout numbers don't get achieved. And you hear all the bad mouthing of PE in particular in the marketplace when they don't get paid out. It's not always PE's fault. The rules are fairly clear as to what an earnout is. It's just making sure that you can hit it. Now, market conditions can change. So if you've done a sale of a business just before COVID and there was an earnout involved and the whole world got shot down, okay, then that's a circumstance that nobody could have predicted, and you can't hold that against the seller. You can't really hold it against the private equity firm if it is private equity either. So outside of those sorts of things, make sure you know what deferred is and what an earnout is. Don't set the numbers so ridiculously high that you're never going to achieve them, because you just work so hard and be disappointed. So, but know what it is you're going to get, and then structure the best terms that you can get, but don't expect 90% on day one unless you're giving the business away. It's just not going to happen, in my opinion, in the normal course of events. Now, where it can happen is in a trade sale. So if you are a decent sized trade business, let's say you're going to sell for 20 and you're doing 3 in profit. If you've got a big trade buyer coming in to buy you, you might find that you get a much bigger percentage of that. And on occasions, you might get all of it on day one. It's rare, but can happen, does happen. But certainly you might get a bigger percentage of it on day one. But for private equity, I wouldn't think that's going to happen very often at all. And I certainly would never structure a deal that way, because the problem with giving the owner all the money on day one is they walk out the door on day two, mentally, if not physically. And that's a big risk to the business. And that's a lot of the reason why it won't happen. Most owners, when they come to sell a business, are going to be well schooled on that as well.
How long typically would it be? A couple of years?
Could be more, depends on it. So it really depends on the value and who's buying it. So you'll see some scenarios where you've got a management buyout buying the business, which is you've retired from the board, you've resigned from day to day, and you've got utmost confidence in the leadership team that's in play. That leadership team has a better inside track on the business than anybody coming in from the outside, and the balance sheet with which to do with what they're going to do next, which means the bank will support them. And in that scenario, you could get more than you would on the open market, because it's, if you like, an inside job, but a proper inside job. But that will mean for that extra money that you're going to get, you're going to be waiting maybe 5, 6 or 7 years to get all of it. But you'd be
as long as 6 or 7 years.
It just depends on the value of the deal, but absolutely it could be. Yeah. And there are some other reasons why that might be preferable, to do with how much of that money the owners are going to keep. So if it's done in a particular way where there's significant tax advantages for the owners to do it that way, then they'll often factor that in because they're paying an awful lot less tax. It's got to be affordable from the company's future profits and earnings. It can't all come from debt, because if you know somebody that understands debt financing really, really well, if you're charging that out at say 6, 10, 12%, that's a big drain on future profits of the business. So you may be better taking a longer term payment from the earnings of the business without the debt service, with less debt service, because you're extending the timeline and taking it from future profits, not bringing in debt to cover it, providing you've got the debt cover ratio to do it in the first place, of course. Then there are lots of circumstances where that could play to be to your advantage, for sure. But typically 3, 4, 5 years is not uncommon. 7 years is more uncommon, for sure. But if you do purchases in the States with SBA loans, those loans are over 10 years. So, but they're amortized back to the ability of the company to pay on projected future profits. So no hard line. Definitely it's going to be deferred. The terms are up to you to negotiate, but make sure they're affordable.
You've mentioned tax a couple of times. I mean, look, you're in England. I'm English. A lot of my audience are English too. So let's answer this question with a UK bent. You know, what kind of tax strategies are out there? And I think, you know, if anything, this is even more apt now than ever. You know, with the new Labour government in there, and the new budget, and the talk of things only getting worse. I mean, you know, what can be done without too much, you know, jiggery pokery and trickery, or without someone upping sticks and moving to Dubai?
Yeah, so there's never any jiggery pokery that we would ever recommend or suggest that anybody does, because HMRC will reverse it and backdate it. You have to assume, right? So anything is legal above board. Look, one of the things that's really worth considering from a tax point of view is actually doing deferred or delayed payment terms, because if you're taking less money off the table up, you know, in the smaller amounts that you take over multiple tax years, the better off your tax position is going to be. For some companies that are bigger with a certain number of employees, there are some strategies that you can deploy that might bring that tax down to potentially zero. But they're very individual and would need, you know, I'd be happy to discuss those with people on a one-to-one basis, because they're very much dependent on the company and your personal circumstance. And so if you want it, your worst position is take it all on day one, pay the tax. Take it over a period of time, minimize the tax because you get it into different tax years. And then for a larger company, you may find yourself in a position where in certain circumstances, and I'd need to look at each one in individually, you might be able to get it down to a couple of points, if not zero. You'll have fees on all of those. So fees to one side, it doesn't matter if you're paying 100 grand in fees and saying 4 million in tax, it's still effectively zero from where you could be. Now in the States, It's similar, just because, you know, so, but there are some countries where it doesn't really move the dial. So if you're in Canada or Germany, you're screwed. For the most part, there are things that you can do to bring it down a bit, but you can't make a big dent in it. In the States, you can make a massive dent, and in some scenarios, get it down to zero. In fact, you might be interested to know that when my book came out, it got banned by Amazon. Now, we never really understood why. They said copyright, but we showed them that the copyright was all intact before we went to get it published, and then we re-showed it to them, and it still didn't get relisted. And then one day I kind of wrote to them and said, look, I'm a first-time publisher. I'm not, you know, I don't exactly make a lot of money out of the book. We make 10 cents a copy, which we give to charity anyway. Incidentally, if anybody of your listeners would like to get a copy of the book, they don't have to buy it. They can, I'll make a QR code available to you, Matt, and then they can just use that to get a PDF version for free. And that means, and the reason for that is also not because I'm a super generous guy, although I am. You can buy it in the UK, you can buy it in America, but you can't buy it anywhere else. So once I made it available as a PDF, dropped once or twice a week by email, chapter at a time, then people all over the world could download it because that's not restricted, right? And I'm not bothered about earning from the book. I'm bothered about getting information into people's hands. But coming back to why we got banned and relisted, I wrote to Amazon and said, look, I'm not sure whether it's the title of the book that you don't like, because some people think it's aggressive, you know, the tax-free piece they think is aggressive. Mm-hmm. And so I said, look, I'm not really doing anything that Jeff Bezos hasn't already done, or Mark Zuckerberg. I said Tim Cook, but I don't think he has, or Elon Musk or Donald Trump. You know, all these people are using the appropriate parts of their tax code to reduce or mitigate or eliminate their taxes completely legally. All I'm doing is taking it from the elite and letting everybody else know that they can do it too. And that's the big thing, is people just don't know what they can do. And so it still went by a couple of weeks, and they never said that that was the reason that they banned it, but all of a sudden it got relisted. And of course I was delighted, because I'd already moved to making it available on PDF if it was going to be an issue for Amazon. And I'm just assuming that was part of the reason. But it's funny how people work, because maybe somebody looked at it and thought, yeah, well, he's right, so we should really relist it. But who knows? Who actually? That's not what they said. So, but if any of your listeners would like to get a copy of it, then I'll get the QR code to you, and they can get it for free.
Amazing, thank you. And so, final question for me then. Well, obviously, the book and your strategies are written for the business owner who's looking to 10x their business and ultimately sell it. But can people who are looking to buy businesses benefit from this as well?
You can.
You poacher turn gamekeeper?
Yeah, you can. So one of the other unexpected journeys for me this year was beginning a mastermind group where other people that are consultants, for example, were interested to know more about how this would work. So after a bit of bullying, I got onto some WebEx sessions just to give them some insight and background, completely for free. I didn't charge anything for it. And then I'd never done that before. I'm not a teacher, trainer, or coach, and that wasn't my objective. So then I did a better version of it, because I learned from the first one, and I cut that down as a V2, which they could watch remotely. On the back of that, people still wanted to work with me to see if they could work with me on a done with you basis, so that they could help their clients. So what they're doing is taking the principles of the book and applying it to their clients, not just because their clients might want to grow the value of the business to sell it, but because they might want to grow the value of the business. And a lot of companies in that mid sector and SME sector are brilliant at doing the thing, but they wouldn't have the first clue on about how to go out and buy a business effectively. So the people that are in my group are going out and helping them do those things. We were talking to an Indian company today that do understand all of this, and they want to come into parts of Europe and the US. They want a presence in the US because they're expecting tax changes from Donald Trump coming in. They want a presence in the UK or in Northern Ireland, because it gives them entry to both the EU and the UK. But they don't know how to go about acquiring that. So one of the people in my group can help them with all of that through a lot of the things that are in the book here. So it's very adaptable, and that was not the intention. It was absolutely poacher turn gatekeeper. You can use a lot of these strategies to help you move forward, because if a business owner is going to do it to try and sell the business or improve the value of it, and my TikTok audience are looking at it for growth with a mind to the future, then why not consultants help earn more money in their businesses with their clients to help their customers do the same thing? And the more people I can help do this through the book or on some of the videos or WhatsApp chats or whatever, then the more business owners are going to keep the money in their banks and not everyone else's, which is the ultimate, which is the goal on this thing, and keeps the promise that I made to my son of helping more companies keep the cash they've got in case they need it. God forbid that we ever get another COVID, right? Hopefully we never will.
Well, listen, Marc, it's been great to have you here, buddy. How can people find you? How can they work with you? Obviously, we'll put some stuff in the show notes, but just give yourself a little shout out while you're still here.
With your permission, I'll send you a QR code so they can just take a picture of that and come straight through. That'll get them onto email, any of my socials, a link to the book. And if they really want to buy one, they can. But if you're not in the US or the UK, get the free version. Or they can hit me up on WhatsApp or send me an email. I'm always answering questions for people. So I'm happy to do that. And then other than that, if they want to send me an email to Marc, M-A-R-C, at acquisitions4you.com. So that's acquisitions, figure 4 you.com. They can reach me that way. Problem with email is sometimes it will go to spam and I won't know. So I would say grab the QR code, hit my socials, and find me from there. It would be the best way for them to do that, I would say. Would that be all right with you, Marc, if I send you that?
Absolutely, buddy. Listen, Marc, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you for sharing. I'm sure. I mean, listen, I've learned some new things, heard some interesting stories, and I'm sure the guys at home have too. So hopefully we'll send some avid readers in your direction in no time.
Thank you so much for having me, and I hope it's been of help. Thank you so much.
Perfect.